Welcome to the Jacob's Ladder podcast, where we talk about loving God, loving others, and loving ourselves at work and at home. Welcome to Jacob's Ladder, episode 233. Today we're going to be speaking with Adam Malone, and our focus on this episode is about work, as we've done a lot in the past with Christian Men at Work, but a little bit of a different twist here. We're going to be talking about applying lessons from being a parent at home to the workplace and vice versa. Let's get right to the interview. Hello, Adam. How are you today?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Doing great. Thanks so much for joining us. Well, let's get started. Why don't you introduce yourselves to our audience? Just tell us a little bit about your testimony in terms of your faith walk, as well as what you do for work.
Sure. First, thanks for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with your listeners. And I love the concept of the Christian Men at Work and Jacob's Ladder. My faith or testimonial, I was baptized when I was 13 years old. So I'm almost 41 now. I'll be 41 next Sunday. And I've been blessed to serve a loving Father for that time. And as Hebrews 12 would tell us, a loving Father disciplines his children. I've endured some of that discipline over my time, and that wasn't pleasant then, but in hindsight has helped me to become a much better follower and father myself. And I've been blessed to be in the kingdom for most of my life.
Very good. Well, we're going to talk about applying some lessons from parenting to the workplace. And I don't think I've ever really come at it from that angle with someone before. So I'm looking forward to this talk. Before we get into some specifics, first of all, tell us what you do for work. Why don't you just do that first, and then I'll get to my next question.
Oh, thank you. And I'm sorry, I should have answered that a moment ago. For work, I am a leadership consultant and public speaker. What that means is I spend my days helping individuals and often or preferably teams function better as leaders, and then also just high-performing, resilient teams that work together with peace and trust. The public speaking aspect of that helps me get to know people better. And that means I do workshops and keynotes, a variety of things to get to know those audiences better and serve them in the best way that works for them, whether that's a speech or a workshop or whatnot.
Sounds good. So what I want to ask you is a question I've asked from time to time, and it's kind of a catchphrase, work-life balance, that you hear a lot about. And I want to get your take on it before we get into this, because I suspect you have maybe a different take on it than some do. Some people think of work-life balance as finding ways to separate their work from their life as much as possible. In other words, don't take your work home, and vice versa. Draw clear lines and between the two. And what do you think about that?
Yeah, no, I think it's a great question. And I am a little, I don't know if controversial is the right point of view, but I definitely kind of look at work-life balance as different. I don't believe in work-life balance, if that makes sense. I believe that we have work and we have life, and they are overlapping. And so to say that we have to balance them, to me, is kind of confusing. We should be blessed to have a work that supports our life, and a life that supports our work. And when I mean when I say that is, I hopefully don't spend all of my working day thinking about, oh, I can't wait to get to my life at the end of this day. That would be a terrible waste of 8 or 10 or 12 hours, however long your workday is, to have to feel that way. And the second piece is I think that we should find work that enables us to live our life to the fullest. And that's going to look different for everyone. And so for me, I've often been someone who worked pretty long hours. I enjoy working. But simultaneously, I've been blessed to have a work situations that have meant that as long as your work was done, you didn't have to maintain some set, 50 hours a week in the office or something. And so if you needed to leave at 3 to go to a kid's baseball game, or you wanted to take a half day on a Friday, or you had kids and so you need to take 3 or 4 weeks off because you brought kids home, like all of those things um, have been blessings in my life that haven't on the outside maybe looked like work-life balance to everyone, but that work has enabled the life that my family has wanted. And sometimes that meant I worked in the evenings to be able to leave early, during the day. And that was the balance that we played that suited us really well.
Well, sounds good, and I would tend to agree with you on all that. So I understand you've got 7 kids, which in today's age is a lot. Wasn't in the past, but now it is. Um, so I can just imagine that just managing a household with a lot of kids would require systems and efficiency, um,
Mm,
and learning how to meet all of your kids' needs
yeah.
while also having good mental health around all that. So, talk to me about that. How do you take some of the things that you've done in being a parent of 7 kids and apply that to your workplace?
Yeah. So we'll say we're crazy. We have 5 kids, family of 7. We are not a fam. We don't have 5. We don't have 7 kids. That sounds crazy to me right now, but I guess 5 sounds crazy to lots of people. Um, so when we think about efficiency and how a household runs, a lot of that has to do with everybody has work and everyone is expected to do that work to the betterment of the family. We do, pay allowances and sometimes things like that for doing some specific types of work. But for example, our older girls, especially, like they don't get allowances for contributing to the family by cooking dinner and unloading the dishwasher and those things. Like we all have work to do to make the family function and exist. And so I think when I think about things like that that relate into the workplace, the concept that we all have work to do, there's a place for everyone to fulfill some need within the broader organization. But I also like to think about the fact that all the work is valuable. So when we trained our 3 and 5-year-old daughters to start cleaning off the table and to unload the dishwasher and those things, didn't work well. It wasn't very efficient. And it was years of training them. And now that they're 13 and 15, they can do all of that work on their own. But that training in the beginning wasn't the most efficient way to get things done. And in the workplace, often the most efficient way to get things done in the moment is to do it ourselves. We have more experience, we have more knowledge, we know exactly what needs to be done. And so that's the fastest, most efficient way to do things today. But if you take a medium or a long term view, growing and developing and mentoring your children in service or your coworkers and those you lead in service often means in the short term we have to trade off, right? We have to trade short term efficiency for long term gain. And I think that's often one of the hardest things for both parents and leaders to embrace is that trade-off is a good one and that I should make it, even though it makes my today less efficient, it will make my tomorrow and my next year much more efficient and much better. Um, and then the just another idea about having 5 kids is everyone has unique needs. We'll probably talk some more about unique needs in a little bit, but everyone has unique needs, and it's not fair to treat everyone the same. Fairness is not a concept I pay a lot of attention to personally, but I think sometimes fairness in the workplace, we tend to think that that means everyone gets to be treated the same. But that's, to me, that's not fairness. We need to treat everyone how they need to be treated and give everyone the grace and the specific things that they need grace in. And that's a big point in our family is that everyone doesn't get treated the same. Everyone gets treated with kindness and grace and mercy. And that may look different for lots of different reasons between each member of the family and the workplace.
Well, that's interesting because a lot of what we call tolerance um, and being equitable in general, as well as in the workplace, seems like it does ultimately result in treating everyone exactly the same. But
Right.
when you treat people differently, that actually takes more work, doesn't it? Because you have to take the time to really understand who that person is.
Yeah, it definitely does take more work for a parent or a leader to lead the people where they are. But you get such a better outcome when you embrace who someone is and what they need. Because if you think about it, maybe the opposite way, it's so much more fair to treat someone as an individual than to treat them the exact same. And this isn't saying we should do that in a way that's harmful, but you wouldn't expect as a parent. I have an almost 15-year-old and I have a 3-year-old. It's unfair and unkind to expect the same sorts of things from them mentally or emotionally or for physically, right? Well, the workplace is the same way when you're dealing with people that are of different capability. They deserve to be treated in that way and developed in that way. And if you take a cookie cutter approach, I feel like you have greater risk of doing harm than doing good.
What are some things, in your opinion, that should be expected of everyone in the workplace?
Mm.
That are just like basic things, as opposed to ways that we should treat people as individuals or kind of specific to their personality or their needs.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. Like there's a difference between people get to act however they want, and everyone based on their background experience and kind of state may deserve slightly different treatment. Um, Examples of things to me that everyone should be expected to toe the line on. An example would be kindness. When I've led my teams, you don't get to be unkind to one another. Now, sometimes people have had a hard day. We need to give them grace because they've had an exceptionally difficult time. But we're all expected to treat each other with kindness, with respect, and frankly, we expect everyone to work hard. Just because someone has had a hard day or a hard week or a hard month, that doesn't mean we just automatically kind of relieve them of all their burden and expectation. Because we work in order to be productive, to provide for all of our families. And so at some point, if someone isn't carrying their weight, that that isn't meeting the expectation that we're all there for, and that does harm to one another. Um, does that make sense? Like in terms of some things that like I think that we can all do and all be expected to provide to one another.
Oh, it does totally, and I agree with that. And I think it's important to draw the distinction that some things are non-negotiable and some things aren't. And of course, every organization has their own goals and their own objectives, and they're writing the paychecks, and so to some degree they get to set the priorities. But those are basic behaviors that I think that I would agree with you. In every organization should be an expectation.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you mentioned earlier about um, training as an example of something you would do um, as a long-term investment as opposed to just doing it yourself. Another thing that makes me think of is that's an example of trusting them to do the work instead of doing the work yourselves. How do you think about the concept of trust when it comes to your parenting as well as in the workplace?
Yeah, so trust to me is the kind of like the bedrock of almost every relationship that we'll ever have. And so, as a parent, one of the easy ways to kind of highlight that is when you think about safety. You want your child to trust you so that when you say stop or go, they obey. And if they're in the street and they're about to get run over and you say stop, they stop and they listen in that way. But establishing that trust isn't easy. We do it with children, small children, relatively quickly because their needs are so easy to see. A baby, they need to be fed, they need to be changed, they need to be held. All those needs we kind of instinctually meet. Um, but as they get older, you have to learn how to keep providing that for that trust, that bedrock of trust, which really rests on, am I authentic? Do they get to see the real me? Or do I risk being hypocritical with my children, where I tell them to do one thing, but then I do something completely different? Um, and similar with empathy, as you're raising children, my oldest two are 13 and 15 daughters, and the concepts of empathy become super important because as a dad, I've never been a teenage girl. I don't understand everything that they're going through, and so how do I use empathy to hear them and validate that it's okay that they're feeling that way, even though if at some point I'm like, I don't really understand how you got there. And any father of daughters on the call gonna have that same like time where they've been working with their children, just been like, I don't understand how we got there, but from an empathy standpoint, we can still validate that it's okay to have feelings that I don't understand. I don't need to understand everything. Um, and as we translate that into the workplace, we have to have authenticity and logic and empathy with everyone that we deal with if we're going to truly establish trust. And that idea of empathy, especially of hearing the concerns of my team members, that doesn't mean I have to agree with them, but I do need them to feel and understand that I am hearing them. Because if they don't feel that way, they're never going to be able to trust me as their leader. Because they're going to say things like, oh, I've told him about those issues, but he never listens to me. Well, if that's the baseline that they start from, we'll never have a great trusting relationship. And so I have to bring all those concepts into the workplace so that people will trust me just like I need my children to trust me in many ways.
Now, I understand you have a son with autism. I've known a few people in that situation, but don't have direct experience with that. Talk to me or talk to our listeners about what you've learned from that particular aspect of your parenting and how that has also informed you in the workplace.
Hmm. Thanks for asking about that. I'll give some details about the family to your listeners. So, um, like we said, five children. Our oldest two are biological. Our younger three are adopted. The oldest of our adopted children was diagnosed with autism about 2 years ago. And as a parent, things that happen when you have a child with autism, some studies have likened it to PTSD and said it's actually the same level of PTSD as that some uh, military members face because you're always on edge. You're always concerned that something's about to send your child into dysregulation. Um, I, in terms of how it's impacted my leadership in the home and at work, I would say the number one thing is embracing the idea that um, sometimes people don't have control of themselves and they don't have control of their emotions and their reactions to things. And it's just another layer of how do you extend grace to one another? Our son, 80 to 90% of the time, he is the absolute sweetest child you could imagine. He is cuddly and lovable and warm. Um, but those 10 or 20% of the time, uh, he can be challenging in ways that are pretty surprising. Um, and we deal with the same thing in the workplace, whether it's people who are autistic or they're having the worst day or the worst week of their life. And we may not understand what those things are. And so it's really caused me to give and extend more grace to those around me. Because when you have someone in your life who can be having the best day possible, and then one little thing can change and it kind of brings the world crashing down, you really get a picture into how people's emotions can control them and change quickly. Um, and that's not just true of 5-year-old boys with autism. That's true of 35-year-old men who don't have a neurodiverse background, that they have struggles, and we need to kind of meet people where they are. And great leaders care for their people even when they're struggling in those ways.
Well, thanks for sharing that. It makes me think of some training I went through recently through work, and it was an awareness of mental health issues,
Mm,
and it was called First Aid for Mental Health, and it was interesting. They talked about the difference between mental health disorders versus mental health challenges, but kind of in the big picture, it just reminded me that everybody on a given day at some level is dealing with something. And it could be as serious as a disorder, or it could just be a challenge, a temporary thing going on in their life. And so, like you said, that you throw a bunch of people together in the workplace, there's just such a need for that grace. Since there's things you might know about and there's things you might not know about, and to just try to take that into consideration instead of having a knee jerk reaction to someone and their behavior at work.
yeah. Well, I think sometimes this it's helpful to think or learn some of the statistics around this, around what's happening in people's life that we don't know about. And the statistics are pretty striking, that like if you get 25 or 30 people in a room, there's multiple people in the room that have someone in their family that's dealing with addiction or substance abuse, which my brother struggled with that before he passed. You've got likely have someone that has some neurodiversity in their family or in their background themselves. You most likely have at least one person in the room that's going through a divorce. You have someone who has a child that has some sort of illness, and when you learn those things, and that most of them go unseen, like you said, it really does help you to see that this concept of being ready to provide first aid to those around us, even for the wounds that we can't see, is part of meeting people where they are as a leader, and showing them the concern and the love that Christ has shown for all of us.
Well, and I think that I think a lot of people struggle with finding purpose in their work. They just think of their work as a paycheck, and I think
Mm,
that's true for those who are faithful, as well as those who don't really practice a faith.
mhm.
Um, and I think just this simple concept of looking for ways to be understanding of others is just by itself can be a purpose of our work. Because in any given moment, you could be exactly what a person needs in the workplace for a need that they have.
Absolutely. I agree completely. And last night we had a big group at our house, and a couple of us got to talking about a similar topic. And a lady was talking about being happy or unhappy in your job, and she was a younger lady, and I kind of had to tell her that, hey, from my experience, happy people, like people that are happy in their job, they're happy when they get a new job. People that are unhappy in their job, they're unhappy when they get a new job. And that um, when we look for ways to serve and have purpose, kind of regardless of what the tasks that we're faced with are, we can find happiness and fulfillment and joy that's deeper than whatever the technical work that I'm doing is. Uh, but it does take a decision to pursue that level of joy and peace in the work that we do every day.
Amen. Well, I understand that some of your specific experience has been you were a supply chain executive for
Mm.
7 years. So let's talk about the reverse, as opposed to applying your home life lessons at work. How do you, or how have you applied some of what you've learned in the workplace at home?
That's a great question. There's a couple funny examples. So when you have a family of seven, you basically are a medium-sized food procurement operation. Uh, and so I do all the meal planning for our house and almost all the grocery shopping for our household. And so I've learned a lot about doing things like demand planning and procurement through my supply chain background. Back during the pandemic lockdown time, we had one of our sons needed a different formula that we had to get from Germany, and it was extremely difficult to get. And so, just like I led teams that built consumption plans and inventory plans, I had a spreadsheet that did almost the exact same thing with formula and based on the lead time, when do we need to order it, and all those things. So certainly, I can say the concept of planning and procurement have woven their way into my family, and then things like lean supply chain, continuous improvement sort of practices have definitely woven their way in. I have a label maker, and so there's some things in our house that now have labels as to what goes where. When you've got 7 people putting things away, sometimes you need some visual maintenance to to help you know exactly what to do and where to put stuff. So yeah, that's a couple of ways that supply chain has woven its way into how I work at home.
It's funny. I think about how much I love spreadsheets at work, and I've at times used spreadsheets at home, and I've found that it works great if it involves tasks that I need to manage. But when I try to get everybody else on board with spreadsheets, that gets into the micromanaging and
Oh yeah, they don't want any part of that.
no.
My wife did really get onto me for the label maker thing, but then I did tell her like, yeah, but ever since I did that, everything's been in the right spot. So I get maybe it was annoying, but it did work, and that was not an effective line of discussion.
Well, this has been a very interesting take on things, and I've really enjoyed it. Do you have any final thoughts before we wrap up?
Sure. Well, first, I love the podcast. I've listened to many of the episodes, and I just appreciate how diligent you are in finding ways to weave and think about how we bring faith into our everyday life and work. So, one, thank you for doing that, and thanks to your listeners for tuning in for that. Not everyone will do that, so thanks to you guys too. The final thought I'll share is. Whether we're leading at home or at work, I just have a core belief that the world needs more great leaders. There's literally, I don't think any problem that we face that would not need more and better leadership. And so, my challenge to your listeners is to embrace that role as a leader and seek ways in your home, in your work, in your church, in your community to create a better future by leading those around you, no matter which sphere that is, to a better place, and doing that with some grace and some mercy that at least your listeners have all experienced through the grace of God, and we can show others many things if we're willing to share that grace as a leader.
Amen. Well said. I agree. Well, if anyone wanted to reach out to you or learn more about what you do, how would they go about doing that?
Sure. The fastest, most direct way, if they just take out their phones and text 33777 as a short code, and then the word operator, that'll add them to my newsletter. They'll get a couple things about managing their career through that. Like I said, that's 33777, and then just the single word operator. And alternatively, I'm super active on LinkedIn. Just look for Adam Malone, and you'll see a picture of a guy with a microphone, and it says keynote speaker and leadership consultant. And I'm that guy. I would love to get to know folks on LinkedIn or through my newsletter.
Well, thanks so much for doing what you do and for taking the time to share it with us today. I really enjoyed it, and I'm sure our listeners did as well. And I hope you have a good rest of your day.
My pleasure. Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Well, I hope you enjoyed this discussion with Adam Malone as much as I did, and I also hope you're feeling inspired to apply something you heard to better love God, love others, and or love yourself. Thanks for listening, and I look forward to our next time together.